You know how we often picture political landscapes with well-defined territories held by established parties?
Sure, the usual setup.
Sometimes you come across a place where that picture gets really interesting, almost fractured. Nepal feels a bit like that right now.
Huh.
You got these long-standing political players, right? But then this surge of independent voices emerges, really shaking the foundations.
It's definitely more than just the usual political maneuvering you see with coalition building and things like that.
Yeah.
Our sources suggest a deeper fragility within Nepal's democratic structures. Almost a kind of, well, stress on the system itself.
Exactly, and that's what we're diving into today. We're exploring the forces reshaping Nepal's democracy.
Okay.
And a key figure in this whole story is Balen Shah, the independent mayor of Kathmandu.
Right. Him. Quite the phenomenon.
We've got a collection of sources here.
Right.
News analyses looking at these democratic pressures, Balen Shah's Wikipedia page for the background info, and a pretty detailed report on his first term.
So the mission.
Basically to understand the challenges facing Nepali democracy and the impact this really unconventional leader is having.
Okay. Sounds good. So these cracks in Nepal's democracy that the sources mention, what are the main concerns they point to?
Well, one of the news analyses highlights two primary threats. First, there's a pro-monarchist movement.
Really? Still. The monarchy was abolished back in, what, 2008?
Exactly, advocating for its reinstatement. So that's one distinct element. But the other, maybe even more significant right now, is this widespread dissatisfaction with what people see as a corrupt and inefficient political system.
Okay, so frustration with the status quo. But why is this described as, like, a more fundamental challenge than just typical political arguments?
The analysis really emphasizes that it's not just about the usual power struggles between parties, This feels more like a questioning of the democratic framework itself.
Driven by what? Either wanting the monarchy back or just being fed up?
Yeah, pretty much. Either a desire to return to that old system or just deep frustration with the current one's inability to deliver.
And into this complicated environment steps Balen Shah. Give us a sense of who he is. How did he even get into politics?
Absolutely. Balen Shah, born in 1990. He's a really unique figure. His background is definitely not your typical politicians.
Oh,
He's a rapper, a music composer, a poet, and also, maybe surprisingly, a structural engineer.
wow. Okay. Rapper and engineer.
Yeah. He's been active in the Nepalese hip-hop scene for over a decade. Then, in the 2022 local elections, he just decided to run for mayor of Kathmandu as an independent.
That's bold. I mean, considering the dominance of established parties like the Nepali Congress and the CPN-UML there.
It was huge, and it wasn't just symbolic he actually won. He became the first independent mayor of Kathmandu.
No kidding. How were the numbers?
Pretty decisive. Shah got 61,767 votes. His main rivals from the big parties, they each got around 38,000.
Wow, that really underscores the level of public support for, well, something different.
Totally.
So what were the main issues he focused on during his campaign? What resonated so strongly?
His campaign really seemed to tap into those everyday frustrations in Kathmandu, the persistent issues with waste management.
Always a big one in cities.
Oh, yeah. And the chaotic traffic, the need for better public services, tackling corruption, and also, importantly, balancing urban development with preserving the city's cultural heritage.
So practical stuff mixed with a bit of identity politics.
Kind of. It seemed he connected with a real desire for tangible improvements and a break from the usual political promises.
And didn't Time magazine recognize him? I think I saw that on his Wikipedia page.
You got it. In 2023, they named him one of their 100 emerging leaders who are shaping the future.
Yeah, that definitely speaks volumes about the impact he's made in a relatively short time. So since becoming mayor, what concrete actions has he taken? What are some key initiatives?
The report on his first term gives us some specifics. One notable initiative is this textbook-free Fridays program in community schools.
Textbook-free Fridays.
Right.
What's the idea there?
The idea is to dedicate Fridays to helping students develop technical skills and participate in extracurricular activities rather than just hitting the books all day.
Interesting. Kind of a different approach to education.
Yeah.
But our sources also highlight some pretty significant controversies during his term, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Let's talk about the crackdown on street vendors. What happened there?
Yeah, this has definitely been a flashpoint. Organizations like Human Rights Watch criticized the Kathmandu municipal government under Shah for allegedly using excessive force against street vendors.
Excessive force? Like what?
Well, there were reports and videos showing municipal police aggressively pursuing vendors, confiscating their goods. It looked pretty rough.
And that led to pushback.
It did. Protests by social activists. One activist named I even held a 199-hour protest outside Kathmandu City Hall.
Wow. And the criticism was that these vendors, often poor, were losing their livelihoods without any alternative.
Exactly. Critics argued that given how important informal businesses are in Nepal's economy, these actions were hitting the urban poor really hard without offering viable solutions.
So what was Mayor Shah's defense? How did he justify it?
Well, Shah basically said he was just enforcing existing laws established by the very lawmakers who are now criticizing him, ironically.
Pointing the finger back.
He also brought up injustices faced by people whose property was confiscated during earlier road expansions, questioning if just restricting vendors was really a long-term fix for poverty.
Did anything come out of the protests?
It seems so. The protest led to dialogue, and an agreement was apparently reached between the city and the activist, I, to explore alternative plans. Things like temporary permits in designated areas, returning confiscated goods.
So a complex situation. Shows the tough balancing act in urban governance. What about the other big one? The ban on Indian movies.
Oh yeah, that was quite dramatic. Shah imposed a ban on screening Indian films in Kathmandu.
Why? What triggered that?
It was because of a line in the movie Adipurish. Something like, Sita is the daughter of India. He demanded that line be removed.
Okay, touching on religious and national sensitivities there.
Definitely. But then the Patna High Court issued an interim order against his ban.
And did he comply?
Not initially. He refused, even went on Facebook accusing the federal government and the courts of being influenced by India, said his decision was in Nepal's national interest.
Whoa, that's a direct challenge to the judiciary. How did that play out?
Well, a contempt of court petition was filed against him, and then the very next day, he reversed his decision and allowed the screenings.
So the legal pressure worked.
Seems like it. He backed down pretty quickly after the contempt filing. There was also something brief mentioned about rap lyrics, another controversy.
Yeah, relatively minor compared to the others, but it happened. Back in July 2022, there was some public discussion about using a sacred crown in the Fupko Shripek.
What's that?
It's a hip-hop reality TV show where Balen Shah was actually a judge. So, using that crown stirred up some debate about cultural and religious sensitivity.
Got it. So stepping back from these specific incidents, the bigger picture seems to be Balen Shah positioning himself against the established political order, right?
So that definitely seems to be the narrative.
The report on his term talks about his battle with the establishment, particularly with Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli and the CPN-UML party. What are some key clashes there?
This really highlights the friction, between this independent figure and the traditional power structures. One major conflict was over unpaid salaries.
Unpaid salaries? For who?
For over 3,500 employees of the Kathmandu Metropolitan City KMC, teachers, sanitation workers. People went without pay for quite a while.
Yeah.
That's serious. How did Balen react?
With a very strong, very public Facebook post. He basically threatened drastic action, saying something like he'd bury them all in pieces if the salaries weren't paid within a week.
Wow, that's intense. Not typical political language.
Definitely not.
What was the root cause of the salary issue? Was the city broke?
It seems it was more bureaucratic. Apparently, there was no chief administrative officer in place for the metropolis, and without that role.
The city reportedly lacked the authorization to disperse funds, even for basic supplies. It led to this paralysis. Mayor Shah was apparently disagreeing with the federal government over appointing a new officer.
So his fiery post was maybe an attempt to break that deadlock.
That seems likely. A way to force the issue.
Okay, so it wasn't just a money problem, but a bureaucratic fight. The report mentions other clashes, too, like evicting squatters.
Yes, his efforts to evict squatters, especially along riverbanks, created a lot of tension.
Why was that so controversial?
Well, while some were genuinely vulnerable people, reports suggest many had political connections. Some were even running businesses on illegally occupied land, allegedly linked to the UML party.
So political ties complicated things.
Exactly. And PM Oli publicly criticized Balen, framing it as targeting the poor, while maybe overlooking the issue of politically connected land grabbing.
Sounds like Oli was trying to score political points there. What about the Darahara Tower disagreement?
That was another interesting one. Balen's administration converted the basement of the historic Darahara Tower into parking. Then the government declared it unsafe.
Okay.
But Balen fired back, pointing out that PM Oli himself had inaugurated Darahar as a completed project just before the last election.
Oh, calling out potential hypocrisy.
Pretty much. Raising questions about why it was suddenly unsafe after being converted to parking. It seemed to expose an inconsistency.
And there was also a stop work order on widening footpaths in New Road. More friction there.
Precisely. A ward chair affiliated with UML opposed widening footpaths in the busy New Road area. Then, ministries aligned with UML issued a stop work order.
How did Balen respond to that?
He went on the offensive again, accused PM Oli of policy corruption related to a big land swap scandal. The Giribandhu tea estate issue.
Yeah.
Whoa, serious accusation. How did UML react? Dismissively. Leaders resorted to personal attacks, trying to downplay his influence. Oli himself publicly called Balen a political bubble that would soon burst, just kind of brushed him off as reckless.
A reckless boy, I think was the quote.
Something like that, yeah. And it seems things are strained even within the Kathmandu city government. The deputy mayor turned against him.
Yeah, Sunita Dangle. She
Yeah.
was elected from the UML. She publicly demanded Balen release findings from a corruption investigation before taking more action.
So divisions even within his own administration.
Seems like it. It paints this picture of a mayor just operating outside the norms, generating both, strong support and really significant opposition.
Definitely a polarizing figure.
Beyond these fights, what kind of governance style has he adopted? What other initiatives define his term?
His style is certainly marked by a focus on direct action, a break from just talk. He's pushed for stricter waste collection schedules.
We mentioned that earlier.
Right.
Yeah.
Made efforts to reclaim sidewalks, despite the controversy. Started the book Free Fridays. He's also big on transparency, apparently. Live streaming city meetings.
What's interesting?
What else? Well, the list is pretty long, according to the report. Combating illegal encroachments on public land, trying to declutter the skyline by removing unauthorized billboards, enforcing stricter parking rules, even trying to sort out that mess of overhead wires you see in Kathmandu.
Ah, yes, the wire spaghetti.
Exactly. Plus, installing fire hydrants, launching a free 24-hour ambulance service, you just dial 102.
Wow, that's tangible.
Offering free legal aid in every ward, trying to regulate public transport via the Gungabu Bus Park, shutting down illegal health clinics, putting doctors and nurses in every ward.
Okay, he's been dizzy.
Very. Also fighting plastic pollution, banning thin plastic bags, pushing digitization like online building permits, and focusing on heritage, like using traditional Nuwari names.
That's a really comprehensive list. Suggests a very active administration trying to touch many different areas.
For sure.
The report also draws a parallel between Balen Shah and Robbie Lamashane. He's another independent figure who's gained prominence, right? Why is that comparison important?
It really highlights this broader trend, doesn't it? Public dissatisfaction with the traditional parties seems to be fueling support for independence. Lamashane's party, the RSP, even won a decent number of seats in the federal parliament.
So it suggests a potential shift, voters actively looking for alternatives.
Yeah, it suggests a deeper questioning of the status quo. The Balen effect maybe is part of a larger movement.
But the report also mentions criticisms of his style, doesn't it? His confrontational approach and difficulties working with the central government.
Yes, definitely. While his supporters see his directness as a strength, proof he gets things done, critics argue it hinders collaboration, makes it harder to work with the federal government on bigger projects.
But coordination is maybe sacrificed for confrontation.
Potentially. And his administration's handling of the Kathmandu flooding crisis also drew some criticism. The report notes he tends to work with a small core team of advisors, maybe around 30 people.
And keeps a low public profile otherwise.
Seems so. Prefers working behind the scenes, maybe. Relying on reading newspapers and monitoring social media rather than constant public appearances. Focused on efficiency, perhaps.
Interesting. So given all this, the impact, the controversies, the style, what does the report suggest about his political future? Is there talk of him forming a party, aiming higher?
There's definitely a lot of speculation. He hasn't officially announced plans for a new party, but it's certainly being discussed.
By his supporters?
Yeah, and there are reports his team might be thinking about fielding independent candidates across Nepal in future local elections, sort of testing his appeal beyond Kathmandu.
Using that cane symbol he campaigned with.
Exactly. That symbol has become quite recognizable, and he seems to connect with a pretty wide range of people, different demographics.
The report mentions his development focus being distinct from traditional politics. What's the idea there?
It suggests his appeal is really built on delivering tangible improvements, practical solutions, less about ideology or party politics, more about, fixing the roads, managing waste.
Which resonates with voters tired of the old ways.
That seems to be the logic. Voters disillusioned with perceived ineffectiveness and self-interest in established parties. But the report also adds a note of caution.
Oh, Oh.
about the challenges of sustaining this momentum and transforming individual support into like a structured, organized political force. It's not easy.
Pointing to failures of other alternative groups.
Yeah, it mentions the struggles of groups like the RSP and the fact that traditional parties still tend to win in by-elections. Overcoming that established machinery is a huge hurdle.
So, Balen Shah has clearly shaken up the conversation in Nepal, but his long-term path is still pretty uncertain.
Absolutely. Huge impact, but future unclear.
Okay, let's broaden out a bit now. Consider the wider political and economic challenges Nepal is facing, based on our sources.
Right. The analysis points to ongoing political instability as a major issue. Since the 2015 constitution, Nepal has had, what, 8 different prime ministers?
Eight. Wow. And the current PM, KP Sharma Oli, this is his 4th time in charge.
That's right. His party, CPN-UML, is currently in coalition with the Nepali Congress. They came together promising stability and economic revival.
But achieving that stability is tough. The electoral system itself plays a role.
It does. That mix of first-past-the-post and proportional representation often means no single party gets a clear majority.
Leading to
Frequent, often fragile coalition governments, prone to internal fights and collapse. It's a cycle.
and economically, what are the headwinds?
Well, currently there's a lot of liquidity in banks because the private sector isn't borrowing much. That seems linked to lower overall demand, maybe fluctuations in interest rates. There's also concern about past investments going into less productive areas like real estate.
But there is one positive economic indicator mentioned.
Yes, foreign exchange reserves are healthy,
Why is that?
mainly due to remittances. Huge amounts sent back by Nepali workers abroad. We're talking nearly 10 billion US dollars in the first 11 months of FY 2023-24. That's over 20% of GDP.
Massive. But the challenge is putting that money to good use within Nepal.
Exactly. Channeling those funds into productive domestic investment.
Okay, one last point from the sources. Term limits. What's the situation there?
It's interesting. Nepal actually has a 2-term limit for local officials, mayors, heads of rural municipalities.
So Balen Shah could only serve 2 terms, max.
Under the current rules, yes. But there are no such limits for the prime minister, ministers, or members of parliament.
And there's debate about changing that.
There is. Proponents argue that broader term limits could encourage generational change, prevent people from holding power for too long, maybe bring in fresh perspectives, stop potential stagnation,
Right, the argument for new blood in politics.
Ex-
Okay, so to kind of wrap this all up, our deep dive today shows Nepal's democracy facing some serious tests from within its own political structures, from external pressures like monarchist calls, but maybe most significantly from this public desire for change.
Yeah, a real restlessness.
And the emergence of independence like Balen Shah really embodies that. He's this disruptive force, right? His approach is unconventional, marked by both innovative ideas and some pretty significant controversies.
Definitely shaking the landscape.
And all this is happening against that backdrop of ongoing political musical chairs and complex economic realities.
It's a very dynamic, maybe volatile situation.
Mm-hmm.
Balen Shah's journey, with all its ups and downs, really underscores this powerful yearning for a different kind of leadership in Nepal.
Even with the criticisms and the fights.
Right. Despite all that, his rise is a clear challenge to how things have usually been done.
Which leads us to a final thought, maybe for our listeners to ponder. Considering this unique case of Balen Shah, what does his experience suggest about the future of political leadership? Not just in Nepal, but maybe in other complex democracies. What about the potential and the perils of these independent movements? How do we, or how do citizens, weigh that balance between challenging a frustrating status quo and, well, ensuring effective, stable governance?
That's $1 million question, isn't it? The balance between disruption and stability.
Exactly. Something to think about.